Taiwan's foreign minister is sounding the alarm now. He says the self-governed island needs to prepare for military conflict with China. This comes 1 week after Taiwan reported the largest daily incursion by Chinese military planes into the island's self-declared air defense identification zone. Joining me right now is the Atlas Organization founder. He is the author of China's Vision of Victory, Jonathan Ward. Jonathan, it's good to have you this morning. Always a pleasure to see you. Your reaction to this, look, we know that China wants to reunify Taiwan, and anybody who says anything about Taiwan being its own independent country gets the backlash from the Chinese Communist Party. Your thoughts on what you're hearing now from Taiwan officials? They need to be prepared for conflict, they say, with the CCP.
Good morning, Maria. It's good to be back. Well, absolutely, they need to be prepared. I mean, this is going to be the centerpiece of deterrence in the Pacific. I mean, for about 50 years, a U.S.-China diplomatic relationship could keep the peace in the Taiwan Straits, but the diplomatic relationship is really deteriorating now, and at this point, it's going to be entirely about the military balance. If we ever lose the ability to maintain deterrence in the Straits, and a lot of that has to do with what Taiwan is capable of. I mean, what can they do to repulse an invasion? If we lose that military balance, then Beijing has made very clear that they seek to recapture this island. So it's quite a dangerous place, I think, in this decade.
Do you expect the CCP to invade Taiwan sooner rather than later? Would you expect this to happen after the Beijing Olympics, before that? And how would the U.S. respond?
Look, again, I think it's all about deterrence. I mean, right now, I think they're not yet at the capability that they need, and we need to make sure that we're evolving our capabilities so that it's a very dangerous choice for them. So as long as we can maintain that, then I think you can keep the balance in the favor of both Taiwan and the United States. It's also going to be important to integrate regional allies like Japan into a defensive strategy in the Pacific. And I think for now we can hold that balance, but that's turning against us, and it's turning against us as China catches up in GDP. I mean, there's 70% of the U.S. GDP now. They're investing that all into weaponry that's designed for this conflict, and also as their sort of nationalistic, at this point, party-driven nationalism really focuses on military opportunities in the region. So, I think it's a very dangerous balance, and we have to make sure that they stop gaining on us economically. And that also means that, it's why it's important that we stop investing in China's strategic industries and emerging technologies. I mean, all of that converts into military power and helps deteriorate this balance.
Yeah, tell that to people like Larry Fink at BlackRock and Ray Dalio at Bridgewater, who want to invest individual money and institution money into these companies, and many of which are tied to the Chinese Communist Party. What are we doing to stop this? I mean, how weak was the G7 statement, Jonathan, last week? President Biden meets with the G7 countries, and they come out with a statement, and they call China a challenge. A challenge, really? You've got right now the use of forced labor in China's Xinjiang region. You've got the CCP invading Hong Kong. They imposed penalties on some companies that produce raw materials used to make solar panels in this administration. So we're waiting to see more of what the Biden administration is going to do to push back on the atrocities going on in the Xinjiang region, as well as any response to what has taken place in Hong Kong. They raided the offices of Apple Daily, threw Jimmy Lai in jail months ago, now threw some of the journalists at Apple Daily in jail to stomp down on any dissent, and we're not seeing any pushback from the rest of the world.
Well, I think the G7 was progress in a certain sense, because for a long time, the Europeans have been, I think, very far apart from how the U.S. has viewed China in the Pacific. And, actions in Hong Kong contributed to them taking a different view of China. And gradually, you have to bring the democracies together with this basic sense of what's at stake in the world, and that's that China is the fundamental threat to our to the free world and our various ways of life. But what you really need is economic coordination between the U.S. and Europe. You need to start rolling out the economic practices that have been used here in the U.S., such as CFIUS, such as forced divestiture, export controls, tariffs. All the entire package that's going to lead to the degradation of China's economic growth, because again, that growth is contributing to military capacity, it's contributing to the optimization of their surveillance state. And yes, people like Ray Dalio and Larry Fink, I think Ray Dalio was absolutely clear that he saw himself as investing in both sides of the U.S.-China competition. So that sort of mercenary attitude, really, he should be held accountable for that. And the idea that something like BlackRock is going out there and sort of safely investing in a totalitarian dictatorship that has military objectives in the Pacific, I mean, that's unconscionable. So I really wish that the leading financiers of America would begin to see this differently, but that appears not to have happened yet. That may require public pressure.
Well, look, China is giving them all licenses to operate in China. And, J.P. Morgan got a license. It's going to have J.P. Morgan China, Goldman Sachs as well. Meanwhile, look no further than the treatment of the Ant Group if you want to see how you're going to get treated once you're in China. Do you really think that American businesses, financiers, are going to be running their businesses? The Ant Group now is in talks with Chinese state-owned enterprises to create a credit scoring company that will put the fintech giant's proprietary consumer data under regulators' purview. What a surprise. Ant Group is going to save and share its user data with the CCP. All, as we know, Chinese researchers directed the U.S. National Institutes of Health to delete gene sequences of early COVID-19 cases from a key scientific database. The NIH confirms it deleted sequences after receiving a request from a Chinese researcher who had submitted them 3 months earlier. Look, we know 60% of Americans believe the COVID-19 was leaked from a Chinese lab. We know that the CCP has been covering all of this up. And in the meanwhile, we've got financial services companies in America gearing up to go set up shop in China, even as we watched just a few months ago Jack Ma get disappeared. Right? He was disappeared for a few months because he had the nerve to criticize the financial services regulations out of the CCP. Your reaction?
Sure. Well, it's a very sad story for Jack Ma. I mean, you can see what China's tech companies are essentially becoming. It's massive data centers for the Chinese government and also centers of innovation as they proceed on their military goals, much of which involves the use of things like artificial intelligence, which, of course, has been done very well at places like Alibaba or Tencent. I mean, that's where, sort of the interplay of the tech companies and China's state goals, whether surveillance or military through civil-military fusion, as we've talked about so much, that's what it really is. And that's what people are investing in when they're investing in this. I mean, people like Jack Ma just don't, and it's a very sad story for Jack Ma. And the other side is for companies going over there and making long-term investments or even near-term investments in China. The anti-foreign sanctions law, which came out this month, is something to be reckoned with. I mean, this is something that includes the possibility of seizing foreign-owned assets in China. So you ask yourself what you're building over there. Are you really building it for the long term? How does it contribute to China's ability to wage a competition against the United States? And at the end of the day, I think policymakers are moving sort of slowly on the investment restriction side, even if they move more quickly on other aspects of U.S.-China competition. But I think this is very much at the heart of it. I mean, if we continue to invest in our adversary, we will lose the military, conflicts that may come.
Yep, absolutely. Great point. Jack Keane has been on this program many times saying we're outgunned when it comes to the Navy already. That's right now, today, China versus the U.S. Jonathan, it's good to see you. You've been spot on this subject for many years. We appreciate your time. Jonathan Ward joining us.